Hi, everybody. Karen Roby and Daphne LaPrance-Runge here for ZDNet. We're talking today, Daphne, about a new Microsoft study where they looked at the impact of, back-to-back meetings, Teams meetings specifically, where we're on video with one another, the impact that that's having on us and our brain waves, stress, all of that kind of stuff, Daphne. So how did they go about doing this study?
They fitted groups of volunteers with what's called an electroencephalogram, an EEG, which basically registers brain activity, the electrical activity going on in our brains. And they asked those groups to carry out 2 hours worth of back-to-back meetings, except one group did the 2 hours straight like that with no break, and the other ones were asked to take 10-minute breaks between each meeting every half hour. They took 10-minute breaks where they were asked to meditate. And what Microsoft researchers did is they looked at how our brain waves behaved differently depending on whether we were taking breaks or not. What they saw and observed takes the form of three main conclusions. The first one was that the brain waves that are associated with stress, they're called beta waves, they tended to accumulate over the course of the 2 hours for those that did not take breaks, meaning that gradually as the meetings continue, the volunteers were just getting more and more stressed. When you take breaks, what happens is that those brainwaves sort of that are associated with stress, they sort of reset, which means that the stress that's instead of accumulating over the course of 2 hours, the stress levels sort of stabilize. And so ultimately the volunteers ended up being less stressed at the end of the 2 hours worth of meetings. The second thing that they looked at is how this impacted whether users or rather volunteers were focused and engaged in those meetings. So to do that, they looked at another type of electrical activity, another type of brainwave. And what they saw, perhaps not surprisingly, is that if you do take a break, you tend to be much more focused, much more engaged, much more concentrated. When you don't take a break, you are much more withdrawn, potentially as a result of stress. And then the last observation that they made is they looked at where in those 2 hours when the stress levels were spiking. And what they saw was that if you do not take a break, you tend to get stressed at moments of transition. So when you're going from one meeting to the next, potentially because you don't have time to sort of start thinking about something new, you need to switch gears, but you don't really have time to, so you get stressed in those moments. So you spike and then accumulate the stress. Whereas if you take a break, as I said, this sort of resetting moment means that this transition is much smoother. And again, you get much less stressed at the end of the day, even if you have many meetings lined up, all of which is just happening thanks to this 10-minute break in between meetings.
Yeah, and certainly you can see how that would help, Daphne. But the difficult thing is that we were all, so many of us, had to work from home and pushed into this situation quickly. So, being digitally overloaded, it was just kind of came with the territory of how things have had to be this last year.
Yeah, definitely. And as you said, with the pandemic, a lot of the tasks, a lot of the meetings that we used to do face to face, or at least physically in an office, we're now doing on a computer. Microsoft, for example, has registered a 1,000% increase in video meetings on its Microsoft 365 platform. Just one indicator of how much more digital work has become. And it's actually not the first time that Microsoft has observed how this might impact our brains. Even before the pandemic, Microsoft was looking at how our brains behave differently depending on whether we're carrying out a task in real life or if we're carrying it out remotely or on our laptops or digitally rather. So similarly, they used these EEG devices that register brainwaves, and they tasked different groups with different meetings and different work related tasks. One of the group did it in real life, one of the group did it remotely. And again, they observed that there was a lot more stress tied to doing this through a laptop, through a screen. Obviously, there are many reasons that this could be the case. One Microsoft researcher put forward the hypothesis that it might be that, for example, when you're in a digital meeting, it's harder to pick up on the non-verbal cues that are that are quite important to actually communicating with your colleagues, whereas in real life it's much more natural to pick up on those cues. So it requires a lot more focus. In turn, it creates a lot more fatigue. And this can be seen in the actual statistics and surveys that have been accumulating in the last few months. about worker well-being, with over half of the workforce actually reporting that they are feeling overloaded with work, tired with work. So there's really this sense of a digital overload. That has been brought about with this pandemic, that is forcing us to do all these things online. And Microsoft's latest research is perhaps just another indicator of how to manage this digital overload, perhaps in a slightly better way, until we have a choice of actually doing things face to face.
Yeah, and that's the million dollar question, Daphne, is how do you handle it then? Because we won't be back to normal if we ever go back to normal 100%. So this is still working from home. It's just still our reality. Any recommendations that came out of this study?
So out of the study, the main recommendation, the most obvious one perhaps, is take breaks, especially if you have back-to-back meetings. It's important to take a break, even if it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, at the start of the meeting, at the end of the meeting. In the case of the Microsoft study, they got the participants to meditate, but it could also be doodling, it could be reading, it could be walking around briefly, anything that makes you take a step away from your laptop. And that's quite important, is the idea of taking a step away from the screen, just to make sure that your brain resets. What the Microsoft researchers warned against, and which is perhaps quite easy to fall to, is using this 5-10 minute break to actually do more work and work on something different. That's counterproductive. That's not the point of it. You will be more productive if you take a 10-minute break between your meetings. You will be more focused and much less tired at the end of the day.
Yeah, taking a break's such a simple thing, but sometimes it's it's a little bit harder than it seems, or it sounds like, to break away from your work and continue to remember to do that. Well, for all you guys out there interested in learning more about this study, make sure you check out Daphne's full article on ZDNet. Thanks for being with us here today.